Hello everyone, it's Feng here. Today we'll be talking about municipal bonds, and again, the information is sourced from the book The Truth About Money. So getting started, what are municipal bonds, right? What are they? Well, they are bonds issued by state and local governments, and they're considered the second safest investment when it comes to default risk, right under federal bonds. Now, there are two types of these bonds, which are general obligation, also known as GO bonds, and they are guaranteed by the issuer, guaranteed, keep in mind, right? And these are primarily funded by taxes. And then there are also revenue bonds, which are subject to default risk, so unlike GO bonds. And this is because the revenue comes from projects, so if the project doesn't make money, you're not going to make money on your investment. Now, munis have a special relationship with taxes, and it's that they are tax-free. They are federal tax-free and, for the most part, state tax-free. And this is because of this whole Supreme Court case between a state and the federal government. But anyways, so that means that a muni at 3% is better than a bank CD at 3%. And that's because the muni isn't taxed while the bank CD is, right? So you make more money off of the muni. And then now if you want to convert, the taxable versus the tax-free rates, there's this equation here on the right, which the tax equivalent rate is the muni rate divided by 100 minus the tax rate percentage. And I also made a table down here on the bottom, which basically uses this equation and puts in some, very common numbers for the muni rates and the tax rates. So what it means basically here is that let's take 6% and a 26% muni rate with a federal tax rate of 25%. That means a muni rate of 6% is equal to like a bank CD of 8%. So in reality, after tax and all of that, it's technically 8%, not just 6%. So despite being tax-free, the munis do have some catches. The first is that the house always wins. What I mean by this is that the government is always going to win. This is because munis are callable. This means that the government can redeem the bond at any time and essentially cancel the bond and just give you your money back. This is good for the government because if the interest rate, let's just say, drops to 1% while they gave you a 5% bond last year, they can cancel it, right, and save themselves from that 4% difference from going bankrupt and failing, right? So it's good for the government, it's good for taxpayers, it's good for residents, but it's annoying to investors because they just canceled on your investment essentially. Now, the government's going to win anyways if interest rises to 5% and they gave you a 1% bond, right? Because of that 4% difference, they're paying you less than how interest rates are now. So you lose. So no matter what, the government's always going to win. Now, the second catch are that there are taxable threats to munis, despite being tax-free, right? And this is first the industrial development bonds, also known as IDBs. And these are not tax-free because the corporations write bonds under the state's name and stuff like that. And essentially there was this whole court case saying, hey, you can't do that. So now you do have to pay taxes on those. So you should probably avoid these munis. And next are that the government tracks your muni interest earnings on your tax reports. So just keep in mind of that the government's always watching us, right? The third is that there are Build America bonds, also known as BABs, and it's essentially when the federal government helps the state pay the interest to investors. And these make up about 1/4 of all munis, so they're pretty popular, right? And they are not tax-free. So if they rise in popularity, then there goes our tax-free munis, right? And then last is that munis are tax-free today, but it's probably not going to be tax-free forever. Okay, there's constant new tax proposals that the government's trying to pass and all that. So just got to be aware of that. So after hearing about how tax-free these munis are, you're probably thinking, oh, tax-free, interest is the best investment ever, right? Because that 6% example earlier turned into 8% when you calculate the tax benefits. And that's not quite the case, okay? And this is because of the compound interest effect. Remember the compounding effect, how it snowballs your money. So for example, a 7% taxable interest rate makes 40% more, right? More than 40% more than a 5% tax-free rate by 20 years. This is because the 7% keeps on snowballing every year, and it's much faster because it's exponential growth than the 5%. So the 7% is going to way, surpass that 5% in the long run. And so basically a 7% taxable, if we use the calculator, turns into a 4.69 tax-free. So even though that 4.69 is lower than 5, if you account for the compounding effect and the exponential growth, it can surpass the growth, right, of the regular tax-free rates. So remember the snowball effect. Now this is all going to be dependent on tax, whether this is for you. So there are the 4 questions of are munis for you. So first, are you under or at the 15% federal income tax bracket? If you are, then the taxables are just better at that point. Your tax is low to the point where you should just go for the taxable investments instead. Next, the next question is, do you have muni bonds in an IRA or a tax qualified account? And if you do, you're making a big mistake, because those IRAs and tax qualified accounts, there's a ton of tax benefits. So why are you investing in tax free investments, right? The third question is are you reinvesting your interest from the munis? Because if you are, you shouldn't be investing in the munis anyway, right? You're kind of messing with the whole snowballing effect here. And then fourth is that, do you rely on this investment interest for your current income? Like, is that your monthly income that you're making? And if it is, then munis are for you, okay? And also, munis are really good for people in the high income tax bracket because of all the tax benefits. So those are the 4 big questions that you should ask yourself. Save these, write these down, do what you will. Now, there are some munis to avoid. So there are the insured municipal bonds, which, if you think about it, insurance is useless on munis, okay? Munis only default if the government fails. And the government has probably only failed once, and that's during the Civil War, okay? So they are way safer than these insurance companies that are providing you the insurance on the munis. So what's the point of getting insurance on them, right? If the insurance company is more likely to fail than the government. Next are municipal auction rate securities. This was essentially a big Wall Street scandal because a ton of nonprofit and small companies and whatnot invested into these thinking that they're so safe. In reality, they weren't safe at all. They lost tons of money. I think it was over $300 billion of failed securities. So it has false safety. Do not invest in these. I don't know if they still exist. I had to check that. And then we mentioned these last 2 previously, which are the IDBs, right? They're not always tax-free. And then the BABs, which are taxable because the federal government's involved. So recapping everything that we learned. First are that munis are bonds issued by state and local governments, and that they are very safe from default risk. Next are that they are tax-free for now. Remember that tax reform can happen any moment, right? But they are tax-free for now. And that munis are callable, so the government always wins, right? They can cancel on you essentially and say, hey, that rate was too high. You can try this rate instead, which is lower. And remember that tax-free isn't always better than taxable, because the taxable has typically higher interest rates, so it'll snowball even harder than a tax-free rate. And it's all going to be dependent on your tax bracket and stuff, right? And then, are munis for you? Remember, refer to the 4 questions that we had earlier. Those are really crucial of whether or not you should invest in munis. And then at the end of the day, you do have to avoid certain munis because they are scams or just not tax-free. And the whole purpose of munis are being tax-free. So that's it. So thank you guys for watching this video. That's it for it. Like, subscribe, do what you will. Not obligated to do so, but if you want to follow my financial literacy journey, then go ahead and do that. Thanks for watching.